jagged and cruel. They were the color of dried blood. These were the ships of the Kthar. The Kthar were a warrior race, but they were more than that. They were predators. They did not just conquer for land or for resources. They conquered for food. Their food was fear. They fed on the terror of their victims. It made them stronger. It was like a drug to them. The lead ship was called the Heartrender. On its bridge stood Commander Gorax. He was huge. His body was covered in thick, chitinous plates. His claws could slice through steel. His eyes glowed with a faint red light. He watched the peaceful world below. He could almost taste the fear already. It would be a good harvest. The Xylans had no real military. Their defense ships were small and weak. The Kthar fleet opened fire. Bright green plasma bolts tore the Xylan ships apart. They exploded into silent flowers of fire in the vacuum. There was no contest. It was a slaughter. Down on the surface, the panic began. The Kthar could feel it. A wave of delicious terror rose from the planet. Gorax breathed it in. He felt a surge of power. This is what they lived for. The invasion was swift. Kthar drop pods rained down on the major cities. The Xylans ran. They screamed. They hid. It was useless. The Kthar hunters moved through the streets. They were not there to kill quickly. They were there to hunt, to cause as much fear as possible before the end. A hunter would corner a family. It would feed on their terror for a moment. Then it would strike. The city fell in hours. Gorax stood on a high tower looking over the ruins. The air was thick with the scent of fear. It was a successful campaign, but he wanted more. He always wanted more. His second-in-command, a scarred veteran named Kral, approached. "The system is ours, Commander. The feast is good." Gorax grunted. "It is adequate, but I hunger for something richer." He turned to his data screen. Scouting reports flashed. There was a species on the other side of this sector, a species called humanity. The reports were fascinating. Humans were physically weak, soft skin, no claws, fragile bones. But their psychological profiles were incredible. Their joy was explosive. Their rage was terrifying. And their fear was a deep, complex, and powerful thing. Gorax felt his mouth water. To feed on such a potent emotion, it was the dream of every Kthar. "Set a course," he commanded, his voice a low rumble, "for the human colony world they call Haven." The great fleet turned away from the broken world of Xylos. Their bellies were full, but their hunger was greater than ever. They were heading for the ultimate prey. The journey to human space was short. The Kthar fleet moved with a single purpose. On the bridge of the Heartrender, the mood was eager. The warriors sharpened their claws. They talked about the feast to come. They imagined the sheer volume of fear they would consume. Humanity would be a delicacy. Commander Gorax reviewed the tactical data on Haven. It was a small colony, a farming and research outpost. Its defenses were minimal. A few orbital platforms, a small planetary militia, nothing that could stand against the Kthar war machine. This would be easy. It would be like walking into a pantry and eating your fill. The fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Haven system. The planet hung in the viewport. It was a beautiful world of blue oceans and green land masses. It looked peaceful. It looked soft. It looked quiet. Too quiet. Gorax expected to see traffic, freighters, shuttles, patrol ships. There was nothing. The space around Haven was empty. "Scan the planet," Gorax ordered. His science officer worked the console. Reading numerous population centers, Commander. Life signs are strong. Technology levels are as expected. But I am detecting no alarm, no raised shields, no defensive fleet movements. That was strange. Their arrival was not subtle. A fleet of warships just appeared in your system. There should be panic. There should be frantic calls for help. There was nothing. The silence was unsettling. Perhaps they are in denial, Kral suggested. Sometimes prey freezes before it runs. Gorax nodded. It was possible. He would give them a reason to panic. Target one of their orbital communication satellites. Destroy it. A plasma lance fired from a cruiser. The satellite vanished in a flash of light and expanding debris. They waited. Still nothing. No response. No angry challenges. No desperate pleas. The planet was silent. This was not right. This was not how prey behaved. A low grumble of confusion moved through the bridge crew. They were predators. They needed the fear. This silence was an empty plate. It was an insult. Deploy the landing parties, Gorax commanded, his voice tight with irritation. If the fear will not come to us, we will go down and hunt for it. I want that feast. Across the fleet, drop pods were loaded with eager Kthar warriors. They launched from the ships, streaking like falling stars towards the planet's surface. They were ready to hunt. They were ready to feed. But down on the quiet green planet, something was waiting for them. Something they could not understand. The Kthar drop pods slammed into the soil of Haven. The impacts were violent, throwing up fountains of dirt and grass. The hatches hissed open. Warriors emerged, their claws extended, their senses tuned to the frequency of terror. They expected chaos. They expected to see humans running in every direction. They expected to hear the beautiful, energizing sound of screams. They found nothing. They had landed on the outskirts of the main colony, a place called New Albany. The streets were paved and clean. Buildings stood in neat rows. Lights were on in the windows. Ground cars were parked perfectly, but there were no people. It was a ghost town. The hunters moved forward, their confusion growing. Where was the fear? Where was the prey? This was wrong. A squad, led by a hunter named Vrax, kicked open the door to a dwelling. The inside was normal. A table was set for a meal. Food was still warm on the plates. A screen on the wall was paused on a children's entertainment show. It was as if everyone had just stood up and walked away moments before. There was no sign of a struggle, no sign of a panic. It was eerie. Another squad checked a commercial building. Desks had work on them. Coffee mugs were half full, but no people. The silence was the worst part. For a species that fed on the noise of emotion, this silence was deafening. It was a void. It was hunger. Vrax reported back to the command post. The settlement is empty, Commander, but it feels occupied. The lights are on. The machines are running. There is just no one here. Gorax, listening from orbit, felt a nut of frustration in his gut. They are hiding. Underground, perhaps. Find them. I did not come here for an empty city. The Kthar spread out, searching for any sign of life. They used thermal scanners. They used motion trackers. They found nothing. The humans were simply gone. But as Vrax's squad moved deeper into the town center, he began to feel something. It was not fear. It was a prickling on his skin, a feeling of being watched. The air felt thick, heavy. He gestured for his squad to be alert. They approached a large circular building. It looked like a community center. This was as good a place to hide as any. Vrax signaled for two of his warriors to watch the entrance. He and another hunter, named Zor, pushed the main doors open. The inside was dark and cool. The hum of air processing was the only sound. Their footsteps echoed on the polished floor. The hunt was on. But for the first time, Vrax felt like he was not the hunter. He felt like he was the one being led. The community center was a vast, open space. It was too dark to see the far walls. Vrax and Zor moved cautiously, their weapons sweeping the gloom. Their eyes, built for low light, struggled to pierce the unnatural darkness, as if the shadows were swallowing the light from their helmet lamps. "There is nothing here," Zor hissed, his voice tense. Vrax did not answer. The prickling feeling on his skin was getting stronger. He could hear something, a faint sound like scratching. It was coming from a hallway to his left. He motioned to Zor, and they moved towards it. The hallway was long and narrow. The scratching grew louder. It was a familiar sound, a click-clack of hard chitinous legs on a hard floor. It was the sound of a driller beetle. A cold knot of primal fear tightened in Vrax's stomach. That was impossible. He was on a human world. Driller beetles did not exist here. They were nightmare creatures from his own past. Predators that hunted young Cathar who were foolish enough to explore the deep caves of the Cathar homeworld. He had not heard that sound in decades. He had buried the memory of the fear. "Do you hear that?" Zor whispered, his voice shaky. Vrax did not reply. He was frozen, listening. The clicking grew faster, closer. A shape moved in the darkness at the end of the hall. It was low to the ground. It had too many legs and multiple glowing red eyes. It was a driller beetle. His childhood fear made real. "No!" Vrax breathed. He raised his plasma rifle and fired. The green bolt lit up the hallway for a second. It revealed the horror in full force. The beetle was massive, its shell glistening, its mandibles clicking. The plasma bolt hit it square in the chest. It should have been vaporized. Instead, the creature shrieked, a high-pitched, horrible sound, and charged. "It's not real!" Zor yelled, backing away. But it felt real. The smell of damp cave filled Vrax's nostrils. The sound of the clicking legs was deafening. He fired again and again. The creature kept coming. It was upon him. He felt a searing pain in his leg as a sharp limb speared through his armor. He screamed. This was not a battle. This was a nightmare. He was no longer a hunter. He was a grub alone in the dark, about to be eaten. He fell to the ground, clawing at the thing that was tearing him apart. Back in the main hall, Zor watched in horror. He saw Vrax on the floor, screaming and firing his weapon at nothing. There was no driller beetle. There was only empty hallway. Vrax was thrashing, fighting an enemy that did not exist. Then Vrax's screams turned into choked gurgles. He went limp. Zor rushed to his side. Vrax was alive, but his eyes were wide open, staring at nothing. A thin line of drool leaked from his mouth. He was catatonic, trapped in a nightmare of his own mind. Zor looked around the dark, empty building. The silence was back, but now it was terrifying. Zor dragged Vax's limp body out of the community center and into the daylight. The rest of the squad gathered around, their confidence shattered. They had seen strong warriors break in battle, but they had never seen one break like this, fighting an invisible enemy. Commander Gorax arrived in a command shuttle, his face a mask of fury. "What happened?" he demanded. Zor explained, his voice trembling. "There was nothing there, Commander. He just started screaming. He saw a driller beetle from the old caves. He fought it, but it was not real." Gorax looked down at Vrax. The hunter was twitching, his claws scraping weakly at his own chest armor. He was still in the nightmare. As Gorax watched, another report crackled over the comms. A different squad, on the other side of the colony. One of their warriors had started clawing at his own helmet, screaming that he couldn't breathe, that he was drowning. They had to sedate him to stop him from tearing his own air supply off. A third report. A hunter was found huddled in the corner of a warehouse, rocking back and forth, muttering about the endless fall. Gorax stood in the middle of the perfectly clean, perfectly silent human street. The pieces clicked together in his mind. The empty city, the lack of fear,
the personalized nightmares. A cold dread, a feeling he had never truly felt before, began to creep into his heart. This was not a defense. This was not a weapon he understood. The humans were not hiding from them. They were not fighting them with guns or ships. They were doing something much more horrifying. They were not generating fear for the Cathar to consume. They were reflecting it. They were finding the deepest, most buried fears inside each Cathar warrior, the fears they had conquered long ago to become predators, and they were pulling those fears out. They were holding up a mirror to their souls, and in that mirror, every Cathar saw themselves not as the hunter, but as the prey. They were using the Cathar's own minds as the weapon, and it was a weapon against which they had no defense. Commander Gorak stood frozen in the silent street. The reality of their situation was a cold shock. This was not a battle. It was a psychological slaughter. He looked at the broken form of Rax, then at the scared faces of his remaining warriors. The fierce confidence they had arrived with was gone, replaced by a nervous tension. They kept glancing at shadows. Their weapons were pointed at nothing. They were hunting ghosts. Gorax keyed his calm link to the fleet in orbit. His voice was tight. He forced himself to sound calm. "Hot Render, this is ground command. We have a situation." He described what had happened. He used words he never thought he would use. Psychic attack, mental warfare. The enemy is targeting our minds. The response from the flagship was silence at first. Then the voice of Admiral Krazak, the fleet commander, came through. It was full of disbelief. "Explain, Commander. Are you saying the humans are using some kind of dream weapon?" "That is exactly what I am saying, Admiral," Gorax replied, his patience thinning. "They are not fighting us physically. They are attacking our thoughts, our memories, our deepest fears." Another pause from the Admiral. Gorax could imagine the confusion on the bridge. They were warriors. They understood plasma phyla and kinetic impacts. They did not understand a war fought inside their own heads. "This is unprecedented," the Admiral finally said. "Your orders, Commander." Gorax took a deep breath. He had to make a decision. Part of him, the old predator, wanted to burn the entire colony from orbit, to wipe this insult from the universe. But a new, cautious part of him whispered a warning. If the humans could do this on the ground, what could they do to a ship's crew? What nightmares waited in the empty void for a mind trapped in a metal box? "We hold our position," Gorak said, surprising himself. "We do not escalate. We need to understand this before we act." He ordered his remaining squads to pull back, to form a tight defensive perimeter around the landing zone. No one was to go exploring. No one was to go into any buildings alone. They would wait. They would try to figure out how to fight an enemy that refused to show itself. The mighty Cathar invasion force was now huddled in a field, afraid of the dark. The feast they had dreamed of had turned into a waking nightmare.
Back on the flagship Hot Render, Admiral Krazak was struggling to comprehend the reports. A science officer, a slender Cathar named Zyle, was analyzing the neural data sent from the surface. Zyle was not a warrior, he was a thinker, and what he was thinking was terrifying. "The patterns are clear, Admiral," Zyle said, his voice calm but firm. "This is not a broadcast signal. It is not a generic fear frequency we can block." He pointed to the swirling patterns on his screen. "Look here. The brain activity of the soldier who feared drowning. It perfectly mirrors the neural signature of a Cathar drowning victim from our own medical archives. And the one who saw the driller beetle? The fear response is an exact match for a primal phobia buried in our genetic memory." Admiral Krazak stared at the data. "What are you saying, scientist? That the humans have access to our own archives?" "No, Admiral," Zyle replied, his voice dropping.
It is far worse. They do not need our archives. They are reading the fears directly from the minds of your soldiers, in real time. The Admiral felt a chill. How is that possible? Zyle took a moment, choosing his words carefully. We Cathar are empaths. We sense the fear of others. We draw it in. We consume it. It is a one-way street. We take. We do not give. We never truly understand it. He tapped the screen. I believe humanity possesses a deeper, more profound form of empathy. They do not just sense emotion, they feel it. They understand it from the inside. They can walk into another mind and see its landscape, its scars, its hidden monsters. He looked the Admiral in the eye. They are not creating these nightmares, sir. They are simply finding the fears that already live inside each warrior, and then they are turning on the lights so the warrior can see them clearly. The Admiral was silent. The concept was alien, horrifying. To weaponize understanding? To use empathy as a tool of war? It was the most brutal strategy he had ever encountered. So how do we fight it? He asked, his voice hollow. Zyle shook his head slowly. Admiral, I do not know. How do you fight a mirror? On the surface, the tension was becoming unbearable. The Cathar warriors were packed together. Every strange sound made them jump. Every flicker of a shadow made them aim their weapons. They were feeding on each other's nervousness. Their own collective anxiety was becoming a poison. Commander Gorex watched his soldiers deteriorate. This was worse than any battle. In a fight, you could see the enemy. You could attack. Here there was nothing to fight, just the silent, waiting colony and the monsters in their own heads. He felt his own control slipping. The cold dread was growing. He was a commander of the Cathar. He would not stand here and let his warriors be picked off one by invisible demons. He had to act. He made a decision, a desperate, final move. It was an ancient Cathar war ritual, the Rage Link. Warriors would join their minds to create a wave of shared fury. It was used to overwhelm a strong enemy position with pure, unstoppable bloodlust. He would turn it around. They would not project rage, they would project terror. They would focus all their power as fear feeders. They would become a psychic spear. They would find the human consciousness and hit it with every nightmare, every horror, every shred of fear they had ever consumed. They would give the humans a taste of true Cathar power. They would break their minds. He gathered his remaining warriors. He explained the plan. Their eyes were wide with fear, but also with a spark of hope. This was something they could do. This was a fight. They formed a circle in the center of their camp. They linked their neural implants. A low hum filled the air as their minds synchronized. Gorex stood in the center, the focal point. He reached out with his mind, searching for the enemy. He felt nothing at first. Then he found it. It was not a single mind. It was the entire colony, a calm, quiet, and vast consciousness, like a still, deep ocean. He gave the mental command, now! The Cathar unleashed their assault. A concentrated wave of pure psychic terror shot out from their circle. It was a tsunami of every fear they had ever harvested. It was meant to shatter the human will into 1,000,000 pieces. The wave of Cathar terror raced towards the calm ocean of the human mind. It was the most powerful psychic attack they had ever mounted. It was meant to crush and destroy. It never landed. Instead, it hit a wall. Not a solid wall, a reflective one. The collective Cathar mind, wide open and pouring out all its violent, stolen fear, was suddenly and completely exposed. And into that open channel the human mind responded. It did not attack. It did not push back. It simply reflected. The tsunami of Cathar terror slammed into a mirror and bounced back, But it was not just their own fear that returned to them. It was their fear amplified and mixed with the fear of humanity, and human fear was different. It was not simple. It was not just the fear of pain or death. It was the fear of being alone in a vast, uncaring universe. The fear of failing those you love. The fear of a loved one dying in your arms. The deep, existential dread of a meaningless life. The cold, silent terror of the infinite void between stars. It was the sum total of all human anxiety, all human sorrow, all human dread. It was a bottomless ocean of complex, profound emotion. The Cathar minds built to handle and process simple primal fear were not built for this. They were not built to feel the weight of a species' entire existential sorrow. The feedback was instant and catastrophic. The linked Cathar network shattered like glass. Every single warrior in the circle screamed in unison. It was a sound of absolute mental agony, a sound of a soul being torn apart. Then silence. They collapsed, all of them. Their bodies twitched on the ground. Their eyes were empty. Their minds were wiped clean, broken. The feast had finally come, and they had eaten until they burst. Deep beneath the city of New Albany, in a quiet, dimly lit room, a man in a simple uniform sat in a comfortable chair. His eyes were closed. A faint smile was on his face. Around him, a dozen other men and women sat in similar chairs, their expressions calm. They were oneirokinetic operators, dream walkers. The man named David opened his eyes. He took a slow, deep breath and removed the lightweight headset from his temples. He looked at the main screen on the wall. It showed the vital signs of the Cathar assault force. Most of the readings were flatlining. The ones that remained showed brain activity consistent with a vegetative state. "The incursion is neutralized," David said, his voice calm. To his left, a woman named Sarah let out a soft sigh. "The feedback surge was intense. I felt their entire library of fear. It was brutal," David nodded. "They tried to push a mountain of horror onto us. We just showed them they were standing at the bottom of it." On another screen, they could see the neural patterns of the Cathar commander, Gorax. He was still fighting, his mind strong but fraying at the edges. David felt a flicker of pity. "They came here to feed on fear," he said softly. "They never understood that we live with ours every day. We don't run from it. We don't feed on it. We made peace with it a long time ago. We looked our monsters in the eye and learned their names." He keyed his comms. A simple, clear message. "Haven Command, this is Watchtower. The psychological incursion has been repelled. All hostile entities are neutralized. 0 human casualties. The battlefield is secure." The battlefield had been the mind, a place the Cathar thought was their home turf, and they had lost everything.
The silence on the planet's surface was a victory, but in orbit, the battle was just beginning. The psychic shockwave from the failed Cathar assault did not just stop at the atmosphere, it echoed. It rippled outwards, a weaker but still potent wave of reflected terror. On the bridge of the flagship Heartrender, Admiral Krazak was waiting for an update from the surface. The comms were dead. Suddenly, a junior officer screamed. He clawed at his console, yelling that the ship's systems were turning against him, that the walls were melting. Another officer stood up, her eyes wide with horror, and began backing away from the viewport. "The void! It's looking at me!" she shrieked before collapsing. Admiral Krazak felt it too. A cold, foreign dread wrapped around his heart. He saw a ghost from his past, a rival he had killed and consumed decades ago, standing just behind his chair, pointing a silent, accusing finger. He shook his head, trying to clear the vision. "Report! What is happening?" he demanded. But his crew was unraveling. Across the fleet, the same scene played out. On a cruiser, the engineering crew sabotaged their own power core, convinced it was a giant parasite. On a destroyer, the captain ordered evasive maneuvers from a non-existent enemy, crashing his ship into a fellow vessel. The Kthar fleet, once a perfectly organized war machine, became a chaotic graveyard of madness. Ships drifted aimlessly. Some fired their weapons at phantom targets. Others shut down completely, their crews lost to internal horrors. The invasion was over. It had not ended in a fiery explosion or a noble last stand. It had ended with a whisper, a silent, invisible storm that swept through the fleet and left behind only broken minds and ghost ships. The predators had been cornered by the one thing they could not fight, themselves. On the surface, Commander Gorax was the last one standing. His mind, stronger than the others, had resisted the full force of the feedback, but he was badly wounded, psychically scarred. He stood in the middle of the landing zone, surrounded by the twitching, catatonic bodies of his warriors. The quiet hum of the human colony was the only sound. He looked up at the sky. He could see the flickering lights of his dying fleet, and in that moment he finally understood. It was not a complicated secret. It was simple. Humanity's greatest strength was not that they felt no fear. It was the opposite. They felt so much of it. They lived with it every single day. They wrestled with it in the dark. They learned its shape, its taste, its many names. They did not defeat fear by destroying it. They defeated it by accepting it, by making it a part of themselves. A Kthar who embraced fear was weak. It meant you were feeling the emotion of prey. A human who embraced fear was unbreakable. It meant you had faced the monster and refused to look away. He had come to this world to make them prey. He now saw the truth. Humanity was not the prey. They were the wilderness. And the wilderness was full of monsters they had already tamed. He was not defeated by soldiers. He was defeated by philosophers, by beings who had mastered the inner universe. A profound shame washed over him. Not shame for losing, but shame for what his people were. They were mere consumers, gluttons. Humanity were artists. They had painted a masterpiece with the colors of their own souls. He stumbled towards his command shuttle, a new and terrifying purpose forming in his broken mind. He had to warn the others.
Gorax dragged himself into his shuttle. The interior felt alien and threatening. Every shadow seemed to move. He ignored the phantoms. They were just echoes. He had a mission. He powered up the shuttle's long-range transmitter. It was a powerful unit, designed for sending battle data across star systems. He bypassed the broken fleet network and opened a channel directly to the Kthar High Command on their home world. He began to speak. His voice was ragged, broken. Each word was a struggle. "This is Commander Gorax of the Heartrender Fleet. Do not acknowledge this message. Just listen." He took a shuddering breath. "The invasion of the human world, Haven, has failed. The fleet is lost. The ground forces are lost. We were not defeated by weapons you can understand." He described what happened. The silent cities, the personalized nightmares, the psychic reflection. They do not fight with steel or fire. They fight with what we bring to them. They show you the monster in your own heart. Our greatest warriors did not break against an army. They broke against a nightmare. His voice dropped to a desperate whisper. "They weaponized our own nature. They used our hunger against us. We are the predators who finally met a greater predator, and that predator is our own reflection." He paused, gathering the last of his strength for the final warning. "You must listen. Never approach human space again. Never scan their worlds. Never even look in their direction. They are not monsters. They are mirrors, and we are too ugly to look at ourselves. Stay away. Forever." He slammed his fist on the console, sending the message screaming into the void. The transmission ended. Gorax leaned back in his chair, exhausted. The shadows in the cockpit deepened. They took the shape of all the beings he had ever consumed. They did not look angry. They looked sad. He closed his eyes. This time he did not fight them. On the surface of Haven, a soft, melodic chime echoed through the streets of New Albany. It was the all-clear signal. Doors that had been locked now opened. People stepped out of their homes and community shelters. They blinked in the sunlight. They looked calm, a little tired, but completely unharmed. Children ran into the parks, laughing and chasing each other. Life returned to normal in a matter of minutes. There was no cheering, no celebration of victory. It was just another day. The onerokinetic operators emerged from their underground bunker, stretching in the fresh air. They were not greeted as heroes. They were just neighbors returning to their jobs. A farmer went back to his fields. A teacher gathered the children for their lessons. The defense was a part of their life, not a separate thing. David and Sarah watched the scene from the bunker entrance. "It's always so quiet afterwards," Sarah remarked. David nodded. "They came for a roar and found silence. It's the one thing they can't process." He looked up at the sky, where the Cathar fleet was now just a collection of drifting metal. They thought they were the masters of fear. They never learned that the only way to master it is to stop being afraid of it. The cleanup would begin soon. Tugs would guide the derelict ships into the sun. The Cathar soldiers on the surface would be collected and cared for in medical facilities, though their minds were likely gone forever. It was a somber end, but it was an end without a single human life lost. The battle had been fought and won in a realm of thought and emotion, a realm the Cathar thought they owned, but humanity called home.
The Cathar High Command received Gorax's final message. The military council listened to it in stunned silence. They replayed it again and again. They analyzed every cracked and desperate word. They did not fully understand it. How could an enemy fight with nightmares? How could a mirror be a weapon? But they understood the result. An entire invasion fleet, their most feared warriors, had been utterly destroyed without a single physical battle. The evidence was undeniable. They immediately declared all human space off-limits, a permanent quarantine zone. They sent warnings to every other species in the sector. They told them to avoid the human worlds. When asked why, the Cathar had no real answer. They could not explain the nature of their defeat. To speak of it was to risk inviting the nightmare back. On their official star charts, the region of space containing humanity was marked with a new, unique symbol. It was not the symbol for a military power or a dangerous anomaly. It was a single, solid, black circle, a symbol of emptiness, of silence. They called it the Zone of Silence, the place where nightmares became real, the place where the great Cathar warriors, the feeders on fear, had gone for the ultimate feast and had been consumed. Their empire, once the most feared in the galaxy, was now permanently humbled. They were not defeated by a greater army. They were not outsmarted by a clever tactic. They were broken by the one thing they thought was their strength. They were not defeated by steel or fire or any weapon they knew.
They were broken by nightmare, and the galaxy slowly learned a new terrifying lesson. The most dangerous monster in the dark was not the one hunting you. It was the one that had been living inside you all along.